Can you see how slick and professional this is? This transition. Welcome.
Thank you.
We have here a fantastic group of people from different sorts of work. The work I did in Northern Ireland as part of the peace process, it was called Unlocking Creativity. And I got involved in that in the way that I got involved in Oklahoma when Burns and Susan came to have a conversation. I got involved in Northern Ireland because I had a phone call from a remarkable woman who simply refused to take no for an answer. She was then the permanent secretary at the Department for Culture, Arts and Leisure in Northern Ireland. I think the only woman in that position. And I think just brought remarkable passion and resilience and determination to the promotion of the idea of creativity across the province of Northern Ireland at the height of really the peace process talks. And that's Aideen McGinley, who's travelled from Northern Ireland to be with us today. So, Aideen.
Thank you.
Sasha Abercorn is also resident in Ireland. And I always have to get this right, Sasha. Is it three greats? The great-great-great-granddaughter.
That's right.
Of the great Russian writer Pushkin, and has done remarkable work across the whole of Ireland through the Pushkin Prize in promoting creativity among young people. And we're going to talk a little bit about these complementary roles. Sandra Janoff runs a fantastic organization called Future Search and has worked literally all over the world with stakeholders from every type of community. I first met Sandra when Aideen brought her into Northern Ireland. She has a remarkable process. It takes 48 hours, I think, doesn't it? We're all locked in the room. We're not allowed to leave, except for comfort breaks, to get people gathered around their sense of what they want to achieve in the future. And she's worked in Uganda, every type of setting with people from all sorts of backgrounds. We'll talk a little bit about that. And Derek Brown, I've known for a long time, since you were a child, I think, probably. Who runs a great organisation called Actor Shop in the UK, working with actors in education and in business to promote innovation. So we wanted to have a conversation about how they see this from their different perspectives, their experience of cultivating innovation in different organisations. And I wanted to start with Aideen, because Aideen has a particular experience of working with governments. I mean, one of my premises in innovation is that it's not top-down. I do a lot of work in education, and there's often an assumption in education that we have to get the government to understand this before we can do anything else. And I always say to people, don't bother. You know, I mean, they might get it, they might not. Some people might get it, but they'll probably leave anyway shortly. And, you know, you shouldn't wait for anybody else to do this for you. The great thing will be to have a government policy that facilitates it, but the real action always happens on the ground. But you still have to work hard with government. They have an important role. And would you mind saying a word or two about it, Aideen? Because when we first met, it was a very difficult situation at that time in Northern Ireland, wasn't it? And it was your conception, really, to take on this unlocking creativity idea. What was that context, and what was the challenge then?
Well, first of all, Northern Ireland was when the peace process just started and we were coming in. I had worked in local government for 25 years, chief executive of a local authority, and I came in as the first woman to come in from outside central government into the lofty title of permanent secretary, which my father asked, did it mean I had a permanent job and I was a secretary? And I said neither. And I had the honour of setting up the Department of Culture, Arts and Leisure, which had never existed before. There had been no investment in culture of any sort in the previous 25 years of the Troubles. And I had a blank sheet, and a very good friend sent me the first week in the job, Ken's report on all our futures, which has been already referred to, which really is the only government report I would ever recommend anybody to read. It genuinely is a wonderful piece of work, and if the Labour government at the time had had the courage to see it through, we would have a very different education system. Though we have a good education system, but a much better one. But anyway, I did lift the phone because I had worked with Sandra in local government on stakeholder engagement, and she'll tell you a little bit about the methodology of Future Search, which is wonderful. But I could get the stakeholders, and my department was fish, films, fiddles and football, because I had everything from Fisheries Conservancy Board to the opera. And how do you get that diverse stakeholder group? How do you get a government policy in place? How do you get politicians to actually agree? How do you get resources committed? So I was sitting at this desk with no money, no staff, no department, and no direction, and the report came. Contacted Ken, and what Ken is such a fine art and data mission is his ability to make sense of things that are very hard to grasp, to try and explain to politicians, you know, really what creativity is. It's a long, slow burn. So we did a process where we created the first ever cultural strategy for Northern Ireland, and Ken came in and worked across the party. It was the first ever cross-party, and we have 4 parties. You think it's bad with 2. Because we have literally 2 versions of the extreme on a spectrum. And Ken helped me, because I couldn't have done it as a public servant, because I was the administrator. I needed a profit guide, for want of a better word, to actually get the sense of it across. And you know, unanimously, the politicians agreed. Once the politicians agreed, I was able to go back, double budgets. There's been investment of almost £250 million in culture in Northern Ireland over the last 10 years, and creativity has been the glue and the defining principle in what's been good that's come out of it. And he helped broker that.
But, Aidan, when you say politicians struggle to get the idea, what's the problem, do you think, for them? Because it's true everywhere. People say yes to creativity, but they then don't do it.
It's the sort of thing you can't touch, but when I read All Our Futures, it was one of those light bulb moments. You thought, I am not alone, somebody else actually gets this. I actually know what they're talking about. And the thing I found, I suppose, most fascinating was the politicians did when it was interpreted for them. So quite often I think a lot of people in this room are interpreters. It's bringing your own personal... the other thing I would have done when I first came into the post, I denied my creativity. I used to say to people, I don't know why I'm running this department. I'm not creative. I am creative. So there was a personal journey for me to recognise that, you know, we all are. And that's the first hurdle. And it's saying to a politician, you know, you're as creative as the next person. So much of it's driven out in us in early life. And I think it's about being tenacious. It's about showing them. For example, we showed the interconnectedness between education, between commerce and culture. Yes. Culture was taken literally to be, I mean, the shorthand for my department was DCAL, Department of Culture, Arts and Leisure, and one very well-known playwright said it was the Department of Crack, the Irish crack, alcohol and laughter. And, you know, that was almost, it was great, but that was actually how it was seen. So how could it be a serious player? We went into very serious issues for Irish and Ulster Scots and language and minority language, and we were able to use creativity there to actually get political issues out through the medium of culture. People started to realise that the culture was a way of having conversations that were difficult elsewhere. We did a lot of work with at community level, from right community up, and indeed my most recent job, the ultimate accolade of transforming a community in a short space of time and becoming the first ever UK city of culture, which we wouldn't have believed. So some of it's about leadership and persistence and getting it and not pushing it on others, but helping them to understand it in their own terms. It's about ownership, about saying, right, well, I'm going to stick with this. As Ken said, I asked him, he said, yes, what do you want me to do? I said, I don't know. And he said, yes, that's okay. You know, who else could you have a conversation with that? I didn't know what I wanted to do, but he helped me shape it.
But we decided to do it.
We did.
Whatever it was. Yeah.
10 years later, exactly.
Sandra, could you say something about that process? Because we went, when you ran Future Search, I mean, what the process is and what the obstacles are that you aim to overcome.
Right. There are so many words that you have used, and we haven't been in direct conversation through the years, though we've been in each other's spirits. But the words you use are the words we've been using, which is what it means to transform a community, transform people's capability to act, and to create conditions for that opportunity for transformation. And Future Search which had its seeds in the early social science of last decades, is just beginning to grab hold of people's creative consciousness at this point in time, because the circle is getting bigger and bigger of people who get it, people who understand the concept of stakeholder. We used the word stakeholder in the early 90s, and people would say, oh, you mean shareholders? And we'd say, no, we mean people who have a stake in the outcomes. And when you get the right stakeholders, the right people in the room, when you get the whole system in the room, then you are no longer just working with a fragmented part of the system. You are working with the system as a whole and enabling them through the methodology based on the principles of getting the whole system in the room and learning about the whole before we go into action, and discovering common ground. Common ground was a concept that was not often used, and today it's mainstream. And common ground really asks, where are our shared aspirations? Where do we want to move forward together? What is it that is in our hearts, in our souls, that describe the future that we want to make happen? And in that discovery, in that journey that people take over a period of 2.5 days, they are moved to say, we are aligned, we have a relationship to go forward, regardless of our differences, because the differences are not denied, but the common ground becomes forefront. So regardless of the conflicts, of the blaming, complaining that used to happen, the moving forward toward this future that people aspire to then translates into action. And that's the magic of bringing people who do not imagine that they can come together on an issue that is important to each of them, but the tendency towards opposition, toward conflict, toward debate, even toward negotiation, that tendency gets put in the background, and the desires that we really do have in common becomes forefront. So very complex issues. I'm honored and humbled to say very complex issues on this globe. The children in Uganda who were experiencing violence, physical, emotional violence on a daily basis, there is an initiative now using Future Search to address the issue of violence against children, to address drug trafficking in the Maldives, to increase sustainability, to integrate sustainability in organizations like IKEA. So it's social and economic and technical problems we didn't think we could get a grasp on. When you create conditions for people to tackle them, surprisingly, we can find solutions.
And there are, just to repeat, there are 5 steps to the process.
Yeah, the methodology itself that put these principles into practice are, again, the principle of getting the whole system in the room to together learn about the past. What is the story that brought us to where we are now? To explore deeply what is happening in the present, and then to dream big, and it was at that point that we were exploring creativity in an organizational or a community model where people were scared. We would say, act out the future that is in your hearts. And they would say, oh, we can't get our leaders to do that. They'll never act out. They'll write, the plans on a flip chart. And having the faith, this is our faith in these creative processes, and then supporting them, to our colleagues, to have the courage to take the step. All of a sudden, we have the vice president of 3M in a hula skirt, and we have the director of the Federal Reserve Bank, running across, pretending he's a football coach, running across and acting out his scenario. So the acting out, the imagining, the dreaming, and the learning all converge to common ground, which then translates to action. So it's past, present, future, common ground, and action is the journey.
And that's been a big part of the process here in Oklahoma, to get you know, to encourage people to see where the common ground is and
Yes.
to frame a common vision. I mean, people manifest the vision in their own ways in their lives, differently, of course, but having this common sense of direction is part of it.
It's so interesting because our fallback stance is to identify where we are different and then try to negotiate those differences. And the differences that make a difference are in the room, because we don't want to move forward without all of the perspectives. As you said, our differences are our strength. Our differences enable development. So when we come together to understand the whole in a deeper, richer, more reality-based way, when it is time to move forward, we can spend all of our time and energy on those things that separate us, or when we discover there are places that we're realigned, we could go forward with that, and that's the choice we make. Yeah. It's a conscious choice.
Derek, this, Aideen said that she didn't feel she was creative. Of course, she's wildly creative, as it turns out. You are, yeah?
Oh, sorry, I'm denying it again, sorry.
You're in denial. People are. But you work with businesses, you work with educators, you use actors. Yes. Is that your common perception too, that people begin by thinking they're not creative and that you have to help them understand that they are?
Yes, it is very much so. We work with large organizations, but we still work with schools. And one reason we still work with schools is because when I started teaching in 1975 in East London, I would get into arguments. I'm sure educationists here will recognize it. I would be going into the staff room, and actually at that point I had to learn not to be too enthusiastic, because there are a lot of tired people sat in the corner, but I would try to curb the enthusiasm. But when I went in and really excited about something that had happened, and I named the child, I sometimes ended up in a sort of toe-to-toe confrontation with other teachers, because they would say, you can't be talking about the same child. What? They're a waste of space. That child has never done anything productive in my class. And I would see them as the most brilliant child that I'd taught. And with this confusion, carried me forward and still does today. And when we're working with large businesses, it's the same. People have a misconception of the ability of themselves and other people. And often when we start working through using actors, we don't ask our people in business to act out, although we do engage in role play, but actually they often call it real play. They say, I've done role play, this isn't role play, this is real. So we ask them to be themselves, but actually through those experiences with the actors, they start to realize their own potential. I can't name the large company that we work with here in the US, but I love their, if you like, tacitly understood principle, which is that it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, because they are wonderfully innovative and they recognize that their people need to be able to use their initiative. And if they're given that responsibility, then they actually apply it in a responsible fashion and become wonderfully creative. But the creativity, they also recognize, starts in the training room. If we went in with a more conventional form of training, then the message we'd be saying is actually, it's as it was, but we're telling you something. So when we go into the training room in large companies, then we're giving a clear message that actually we want you to be creative and innovative. And that comes back. And another question which excites me about everybody here is that having spent 21 years in education, justifying and fighting for the place of the arts, and I brought this, Ken. Actually, there's a thermos there, there's hot tea as well. I felt like I was very English, coming on with a thermos and a newspaper. But the headline, it was the paper as I flew out, it said, "Education reform will destroy UK's creative economy." And that's exactly what we're going through, so we're still fighting the same battle. But what I find within the business sector is that they don't have a problem with creativity. They embrace it. They look as the way forward. So why am I continually fighting for those children that I taught in East London in 1975, because I knew they were wonderfully creative and could contribute. And I'm still fighting for them to change education when business is also recognizing that creativity is the way forward. And I would like to think that we're at that point where maybe melodrama was when electric light came into the theatre. We had a whole style of acting which was accepted within Gaslight and Limelight as being the right way of doing it. And then somebody came in with electric light, and they flicked the switch, and suddenly actors felt a little foolish and recognized that things need to change. And that, I think, is what business people here and educators have to do now, is to say, we're turning on the switch. What you did in the past was great, but we're turning on a switch. It's a whole new era. And that's what excites me about the people here, because I know your committee, with All Our Futures, had people who were successful at school and very unsuccessful.
Yes, sir. Well, I mean, one of the reasons the project here in Oklahoma, as it was in Northern Ireland, focuses on commerce, culture, and education is because they're all intimately connected. And the problem is that they're not seen that way at the policy level. I mean, it's a great irony to me that businesses everywhere want creativity and innovation. But this dead culture of standardized testing that's blighting education is often being promoted in what politicians believe to be the interests of the economy. And it's the exact opposite. So you end up doing remedial programs in business to help people recover the creativity they lost in education.
Absolutely.
And you're right, it's cyclical. We had a whole campaign there in the UK. Then that's why I say let's not worry too much about them. We have a new Secretary of State now who simply doesn't get it. Yeah. And it is like that, but you know, it's why you have to play the long game. But I wanted to bring Sasha in because underpinning all of this is the idea that it's all about individuals, it's personal. You have to awaken individual creativity as well as think of the broader context. And I know, Sasha, when you set up the Pushkin Prize in Ireland, there was a very personal origin to you taking that initiative, wasn't it? Do you want to say a word about that and what it's grown into since?
Yes, Ken. Well, it was a very personal event that happened in my life, but I think I have to take myself back to yesterday on our visit around Oklahoma City, when the three of us were walking around the city, and we went to the Memorial Garden. And there, I have to say, I experienced with my heart absolutely in my hands, really, what we have been through in Ireland over the last 35, 40 years, and indeed in my town of Omagh, which was bombed only about 18 years ago, and we lost so many young people. But it is as if creativity for me has come out of destruction. And what happened was that back in the 80s, mid-80s, my daughter Sophie kept having nightmares. And every night she felt we were being attacked, we were being invaded. And I felt to myself, what is this? What is going to happen if this young girl is going to grow up with such fear in her heart? But what is going to happen to every other child in this land of Ireland, north and south, if we're going to carry on with this violence that we had? Feelings, if they're not transformed, as we all know, will become another bomb, another bullet. But what can we do? I then wondered, in education, was this being addressed in any way? And the answer was no, because we have to pass our exams, we have to get the answers right, we have to get that bit of paper to get us on to the next job, whatever. And I really, truly didn't know what to do. But then, as luck would have it, and as the creative spirit seems to always work when it sees an opening, my ancestor, Alexander Pushkin, the great writer in Russia, was being celebrated, commemorated in England. And I went to this great commemoration, and I suddenly saw an amazing event whereby people from very different persuasions, the Soviet bloc people, the white emigres, the mixtures of every sort and kind, coming together because of the voice of a great, great artist. And I realized that is where the universal ground is. Now, living in Northern Ireland, as I had for the past 10, 15 years prior to this, I realized we were living in a tribal country where we were divided into Protestants and Catholics, north and south. Everything was separated. And I thought, well, maybe into school I could bring this idea of the Pushkin Prize something that nobody would really know much about, because who would know about Pushkin? That didn't matter. He was a kind of passport, really, a creative voice to allow children to find their voices. And that indeed has been what we've been working on for the last 25 years. And children are being very creative. They're finding their voices through expressing fear, to expressing joy, whatever the feelings are, is coming out now in a creative way. But the most important and underpinning factor of all this are the teachers themselves. Because if that teacher hasn't got a voice, if that voice hasn't been unleashed for the teacher himself, herself, how can they possibly pass this energy on to the child in the classroom? So now we work in a program called Inspiring Educators, and teachers come, all teachers from a school come and spend a night and a day with us. They do environmental work to go out and use their senses to allow the world of creation to help us first and foremost. And as Ted says, that this is an organic program. We've got little seedlings, the children of the future, and we're watering them, we're tending them, we're giving them the chance to grow, to full potential, to actually branch out and flourish. And so I have found this past 25 years a very, very inspiring time to be with the young of this time who are now beginning to flourish and, I believe, take off.
How many children have you involved in the program so far, would you say?
Well, I would say over 10,000, really, but it's so hard to account for what's been happening. It's like a river that flows on, and you simply don't know where it's got to.
Yes.
It's very hard to evaluate this.
And I think that's the point I wanted to emphasize, is that, like the Oklahoma Creativity Project, it started with a conversation, and now it's spread out across the whole state. The work in Northern Ireland started with a phone call, you know, Aidine's idea, and it's led to millions of pounds of investment, massive transformation in parts of it. You don't know how these seeds start to grow and how they cross-propagate, and it is about creating that climate, isn't it? Did you want a last word, Sandra? Yeah.
Oh, I also add that it's supported by courage and by people aligned with others who have the courage and the faith in order to take a step into the unknown.
Yes.
Because, and I think everyone in this room knows this quote, if we always do what we've always done, we always get what we've always gotten. And what we're talking about is doing something different, a step in a new direction.
Yeah. And we have to wrap up now because, you know, say time is short today. But you're going to be around today, Olive, aren't you? So can I encourage you to approach these people and talk more with them, because they're all great leaders and have achieved wonderful things. You know, a genuinely creative idea takes on a life of its own. I was thinking recently about, you know, the iPhone. It was designed by Jonathan Ive and his team at Apple. The iPhone had, when they were designing it, they built in the capacity for apps. So there are now millions of apps. I don't know if you know, but one of the apps on the iPhone will, if you download it, it turns the iPhone into a blues harmonica. So if you turn it on its side, you can actually play the Delta blues on your iPhone. I can't imagine, even though they're highly creative people, that when Steve Jobs and Jonathan Ive sat down to plan the iPhone, that they had that in mind, you know? I'm sure they think, look, we're going to come up with a smartphone, but it's really important that it can turn into a harmonica. Otherwise, who's going to buy it? You know, really. Who's going to want a phone that you can't play the blues on? What happens is, if a really great idea hits people, people gather around it and they own it and they turn it into something else, and you have this whole ecology of creativity that starts to take over the landscape. And that's what these stories have, I think, been a great illustration of, and it's what is happening here. I really do think it's important to play all ends of the system. You have to work with business, with government, but you have to encourage people on the ground. And you know, people often talk about the need for a revolution. I do. I think that's what we do need. We need a creative revolution. But it happens through individual actions. It happens through small things adding up and cross-connecting. There was a great quote from Benjamin Franklin, who said there are 3 types of people in the world. He said there are those who are immovable, those who are movable, and those who move. And you know what he means? So some people just don't get it. They're not going to get it. I just think, don't waste your time with them. They're just not going to get it. Leave them alone. Yeah, there are some people who would be open to the idea, then work with them and encourage them. And there's some people who have already got it and they're moving. And if enough people move, then you have a movement. And that's really what all of this is about. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you to the panel.